Hello everyone, thank you for joining us online this evening for a conversation between K-Ming Chang and Franny Choi. My name is Emily Jung-Min I am the poetry editor for The Margins, the literary magazine of the Asian American Writers Workshop, and I am the author of the poetry collection A Cruelty Special to Our Species. For those of you who are new to the Asian American Writers Workshop, welcome. AAWW is a nonprofit organization dedicated to celebrating and uplifting Asian diasporic literature and storytelling. At a time when our communities are specifically vulnerable, we continue to offer a public and virtual space in which we can imagine a more just future. You can visit aaww.org for more information about our programs, fellowships, and more. During this event, we ask that all audience members practice nonviolence in the chat with each other and with the authors. Harassment, discrimination, and other forms of comments that are racist, transphobic, homophobic, ableist, and misogynist will be flagged, and the person will be removed from this event. This evening, we will begin with a reading from K-Ming's debut novel, Bestiary. Following the reading, we will hear a conversation between K-Ming and Franny. Books are for sale at this event, thanks to our friends at Books Are Magic. You can find the link to purchase books in the chat. I met both K-Ming and Franny through the workshop. I first encountered K-Ming's work as a poetry submission to The Margins in 2016, and I remember feeling completely blown away. And 2 years later, I was lucky to meet her in person when she agreed to read with me at the workshop when my own book was released. And I met Franny in 2014 when I was an author events intern at the workshop, and her book had come out that year. The book was Floating Brilliant Con, her first collection, and she did a reading at the workshop, and all the interns were completely amazed by her performance. And I think that book was one of the first Korean American poetry collections I had ever read. So without further ado, I am very much delighted to introduce K-Ming and Franny. K-Ming Chang is a Kundiman Fellow, a Lambda Literary Award finalist, and the winner of a 2019 Pushcart Prize in Poetry. Her debut novel, Bestiary, is published by One World Random House today, September 29, 2020, and is longlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize. Franny Choi is a writer of poems, essays, and plays. She is the author of 2 poetry collections, Soft Science and Floating Brilliant Gone, as well as a chapbook, Death by Sex Machine. She is a Kundiman Fellow, a 2019 Ruth, Lilly, and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Fellow, and a graduate of the University of Michigan's Helen Zell Writers Program. A former news editor at Hyphen Magazine, she co-hosts the podcast Verses alongside fellow Dark Noise Collective member Danez Smith. She is a current Gaius Charles Bolin Fellow in English at Williams College. K-Ming, congratulations on releasing your first novel. And everyone, thank you for joining us this evening. Please join me in welcoming K-Ming and Franny.
Hi. Hi, all. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can hear me. I just wanted to say thank you so much to the Asian American Writers Workshop for hosting. Oh, yeah, you can hear me. Yay. Okay, perfect. I was very nervous for a second. Zoom crashed right before I turned on everything. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much to the Asian American Writers Workshop for hosting this and for having me. And I love that Emily mentioned The Margins and my poem in The Margins, because The Margins is actually one of my very first publications when I was a teenager, and so it just feels so full circle and poetic to be here with you all. I also want to say thank you so much to Franny for being with me for the launch and for this conversation. I have soft science with me, if you can see it. Yeah, your work, I think, just embodies possibility to me, and I'm so inspired by your poems. And I just feel like I'm just really giddy to be able to spend some like virtual time with you. So thank you. And I'll read a bit from Bestiary. So just for a little bit of context, it's about 3 generations of Taiwanese American women, and this section is from the perspective of daughter, who's the 3rd generation. She's very young, 12, 13, and she basically, I'm trying to figure out how to kind of like phrase this so that it doesn't give too much away, but she grows a tiger tail overnight. So if a tail is mentioned, it is attached to her body. So just for context, and she meets a girl named Ben, who wears a key around her neck, and the key kind of has like a more mysterious purpose later on in the book. But that's just for context, so you know who Ben is and who the narrator is. So thank you so much. I'll read, this is also very spliced together excerpts. So if there are some awkward transitions, please excuse me. Thank you. Thank you all for being here and listening. We spent every day with our shoulder blades unsheathed, our t-shirts knotted up to show our belly buttons, our elbows rubbing like flint when we walked down the hallways side by side, skin sparked with tan bark burns from wrestling on the playground. We licked each other down to wicks. We ditched ESL together. In history class, instead of memorizing the order of the presidents, we played fuck, marry, kill with the founding fathers and decided to kill all of them. We squatted in the baseball diamond and read books far below our recommended age level. The Madeline books were my favorite because I liked to pretend I was a French orphan who ate bread and butter for breakfast in a cathedral full of fatherless girls, where the only boy owned a guillotine. I told Ben I related to the guillotine the most. I, too, was a direct descendant of gravity, born from women who belonged inside their countries the way blades belonged inside a body. The Madeline girls all wore black bows in their hair, so I tied one in mine, though it was the same color as my hair and therefore invisible. In the first book, Madeline falls into a river and gets saved by a dog. She adopts the dog and names her Genevieve. My mother looked at the pictures in every book I hid behind the toilet at home, tearing out pages she said I was too young to understand. For example, she said, I was too young to know what a river means, what shape it can slur into. She tore out the page where Genevieve saves Madeline from the water, gripping the girl's neck in her mouth. It was the scene I reenacted with Ben on the playground. She flailed on her back in the gravel, pretending to drown, while I flipped her over and nipped her sweat-plated neck, my teeth tenderizing the bone there. I dragged her to the Tambark shore, panting through my nose, feeling her pulse ripen sweet in my mouth as a pear. Our teacher told us grammar was the god of language, but Ben was her own deity. I mimicked the way all of Ben's sentences ended with a purr that made me feel feline, foreign to myself. Her accent was an axe. Mother abbreviated to moth, country to cunt. There was a game where the teacher pointed at pictures of objects on a projector screen and asked us for their names: apple, bus, cat, doctor. But Ben had her own vocabulary, made mostly of the sounds different bird flocks produced when they passed over the parking lot. The sound they make, Ben told me, depended on the density of the flock and whether or not they were native to the weather here. She could hear any sound once and continue the strand of it, threading the sound through her left ear and pulling it out of her mouth. At noon, she walked up to me and stole my reduced lunch hot dog bun, ripping it into confetti-sized pieces and feeding it to the crows. They walked up to the beach and pecked at her ankles, opening their beaks as if to name her. One afternoon, we ran from our older brothers and their foam pellet guns. They shut off every light in the house, chasing us through the kitchen and into the yard and back into the kitchen, where we rifled the drawers for a knife to threaten them back. Ben's brother had large hands with fingers that curl naturally, adapted for pulling triggers and professional nose picking. The 2 boys retreated temporarily to my brother's room, saying that when they came back out, we'd better be hidden or already dead. There was nowhere that could fit both our bodies except behind the sofa, where we wouldn't last. I kissed her before our deaths, pretended the dark was not man-made, pretended our brothers' guns shot real bullets, not jelly-tipped shafts I could catch midair. I wanted permanent damage, a war where one side was the other's shadow, one body was the other's blade. We kissed, my tongue serenading her teeth. She put her palm on the back of my neck, and I was sweating a dress. My hands honeymooned on her hips. The key around her neck nudged me just below the collarbone, but I didn't pull away. Between our chests, the key heated until I thought it would weld itself into a new shape, a hinge between our bodies. Ben's ribs parted against mine, releasing her heart into my hands, a fistful of feathers. My throat a perch for her teeth. Then I heard the sound of our brothers reloading on the other side of the sofa, squinting to separate our bodies from the dark. We kept our eyes closed, her mouth on my shoulder now. Tomorrow there would be a bruise, a dark spot on the ball of my shoulder, and I think for a second that my skin was of another species, that I was finally turning into what my tail wanted me to be. But then I'd remember yesterday, which was today, which was her mouth making my shoulder lift like a wing. Our brothers took aim, still squinting, unable to tell if there was one body or two. We let them. We were silent when the foam bullets bounced off our thighs and bellies. Ben fell to her side and pretended to bleed out of her mouth, her tongue twitching in the dark like a severed lizard tail. The inside of my mouth felt sore, spoken for. It was a lie, letting them believe we could die, but we did it because it was fun to watch them be sorry later. They mourned us by throwing their pellets one by one down the garbage disposal while we rolled over onto our bellies and laughed with all the blood in us. We laughed until we pissed ourselves warm and had to line our underwear with paper towels. I wanted to taste everything native to her. I held her spit in my mouth, wondering if this is what the teacher meant by exchanging bodily fluids. We'd just begun 7th grade sex education, which mostly meant our teacher explained that the adhesive wings of a maxi pad were not literal wings and could not equip us with flight. The teacher told us to develop a platonic relationship with our bodies. On the list of illicit fluids that could be exchanged or bartered, semen, vaginal discharge, blood. But there was nothing about what we'd done. In the animal encyclopedia Ben and I memorized, every hierarchy had a name, every violence a vocabulary. Somewhere, there was a name for our exchange, in a language that was kept from us. That's the end of the excerpt. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, K-Ming. Oh my goodness. Feel free, folks who are here, attendees, to let us know in the chat, show love in the chat for K-Ming, and congratulate her on this incredible accomplishment of publishing your debut novel. So congratulations. Yeah, I'm so happy to get to be in conversation with you. Yeah, Eric said a whole debut novel, which is true. The entirety of a debut novel. Yeah. So so I guess for folks who are here with us, the way this will work is we'll talk for about 30 minutes or so. I've got some questions here, but I think that it's also great to be able to just have a conversation. So it can be less like interview and more like conversation.
Yeah.
And then we'll have some time toward the end for Q&A. So if you at some point, during this conversation, if you think of a question that you'd like to ask direct to K-Ming, you can use the Q&A function, I believe, to type that question in, and then we'll start answering them like 15 minutes toward the end. Cool. Okay, sweet. So I guess the first thing that I want to say, or first thing that I want to ask is, I always like to ask people about the kind of like origin story of the things that they made. So yeah, can you tell us about how this book came to be, like what birthed it into the world?
Yeah, I feel like it's a very anticlimactic story, but in my head it was like super dramatic. But from the outside, it's been me like sitting in a room going, oh, but to me it was really dramatic. I think for me I was at home for summer. And I was also taking classes at a local state college on Asian American history, and I was like processing all of this. Yeah, all of these historical texts. And I think that's where the footnotes came from too, because I was like, oh, I want to kind of play with what footnotes do. But while I was at home, I was thinking about all of the stories and folklore that I grew up with, that were told to me by the women in my family, and specifically the story of Hugupo in the book, which is the tiger tail myth. Like my mom would tell me that story, I think to try to put me to sleep, but it did the opposite. It just made me extra hyper. And there was so,
oh my
yeah,
God.
I know. I was like, it's a really horrifying story. It's about the tiger spirit who lives in a woman's body and like eats children's toes and calls them peanuts, which is a very specific detail. And I was like, is it just because we like eating peanuts? Like, what is that? Very specific. Yeah, and so that story was really resonating with me, and like how embodied it was, how to me it felt so alive, because it came from my mother. And I remember the way she would act it out and retell it, and every single time she told it, it would be different. And yeah, I think that like spirit of oral storytelling became the birth of this book, which is why it's a bit nonsensical at times. It's very like not cohesive. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like super lyrical. I think that like, I don't know, I think that there's like lyric time and narrative time kind of like in books, and this book sort of lives somewhere in between those. And you are also a poet by trade.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what it was like to move from poetry to prose, and what kind of what you found there, what was hard, what was new?
Yeah, I really love that you said lyric time. I feel like I'm able to kind of legitimize my book more thinking about that. Yeah, because I was like, I don't really know like what the chronology is, but you're right. I think like language is its own kind of like logic and pleasure and beauty in the book that like led me through that process. But yeah, no, I am so happy to be speaking to you about poetry, because I feel like your poetry has been so influential to me. But yeah, I was noticing that my poems were becoming increasingly narrative, and that they increasingly had a plot. And I was like, oh, interesting. Like I think before I was more, again, like guided by like fragments, and it was still very fragmented. I was like, oh, I'm really like I'm trying to catalog something in this very, very thorough way. And I realized I was moving towards narrative. And then ironically, when I was like, oh, I'm going to start writing narrative, it was like, there was no narrative. There was like no plot and no characters. But yeah, so I think that movement to me felt really natural in just the direction that I was going, and having these very specific characters in mind. But a lot of the process felt really similar, and that was still very language driven. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, it's so funny to, like I super relate to that spirit of when I'm in poetry space being like, I'm going to break out, and then like moving to like prose space and be like, I'm not, this is like,
exactly.
Let me live in like the gutter in between. Absolutely. Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, I also love the way that when you said that your mom would tell you the bedtime story and it would be different every time. Like one like super immigrant mom move. And two like craft proposal. So it's so interesting. So like, I don't know. I guess like in this book, like there are stories that are told kind of over and over again, and they're different every time. Like for I guess it's interesting because it's like it's the launch, so it's weird to talk to you about the themes and like the book when a lot of people who are listening here might not have read it yet because it's just come out now. But there's a story about like the river, the grandmother story about the river, which I won't talk too much about, but it sort of like comes up again and again and gets revised every time. So I guess like, so what was that like to revisit some of those stories, and does that have something to do with the way that stories were told in your family?
Oh yeah, completely. Like the whole idea of there is no canonical version, there's no kind of authoritative text version of the story. It's all oral and very dramatically reenacted. And yeah, like every single time I asked, like the version would change a little. And I just love that idea of of stories being this like extremely bodily, like form of communicating and showing love and tenderness. Like my mom would insert commercial breaks in her stories, and I'm like, I was like, what's going on?
Wait, like literal commercial breaks?
Oh
like
yeah, she would like fake a commercial break, or she's like, oh, this turned into, a guango, it turned into an ad, and be like, oh, and this is where, like product placement. I was like, what's going on?
So funny.
And or like switch languages, and it was all very fluid. And yeah, I think what you're saying about the river, like that actually became the central structure of my book. Like I felt like rather than thinking about a plot, like I thought a lot about meandering and how a river is this is this thing with like many curves and bends to it. And I think traditionally when we think of plot, we're like, oh, it has to be, rising action. And this is when I don't know the stages of plot. A very specific, I was like, rising action, very specific kind of arc. And what I liked about thinking about the river was thinking about all these different digressions and all these different curves and bends to it, and how maybe the story could follow a more, less maybe like Western Eurocentric idea of what a story could be. And yeah, and the river itself is like very important because I feel like it ties so much to like the image's umbilical cord and like the river as a body. Like near the end of the book, the river literally is like, I'm a woman, hello. Kind of announces herself on the page, and just like water also as its own kind of living, breathing consciousness. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, this book is like it's so embodied, like so deep, like it gets into like the gross parts of the body, like I feel like every character's like most private body parts like enter the picture at some point. Like people are farting, people are like shitting their pants, so can you what I guess like why is it why is the body so present?
Yeah, I mean, I always struggle with this too, because I think like there are always moments where I go back and I'm like, wow, I went really overboard with that. Where it's like, whoa, I went so far. And and I think it was just like, it was kind of a purposeful excessiveness that when I was writing, I didn't really realize quite what I was doing. But yeah, like for me, I felt like those really gross parts were also a form of intimacy with the characters. Like I feel like with the people in my life, I'm most willing to talk about my body or other parts or these very intimate parts of myself with those that I feel really close to. And rather than it being like shame or disgust, like I feel like it's representative of having that really intimate bond with someone. And I feel like the characters have that kind of intimacy with each other, and they're kind of really shameless about being like, oh, and and I felt like that was true to like the most intimate relationships. And I think there's this desire to distance ourselves from things that seem really disgusting, and to like really want to attach shame to so many of these things. And yeah, I think the characters definitely don't subscribe necessarily to that and don't distance themselves. And I wanted like the beauty and the kind of grossness to coexist and commingle, rather than, like putting a certain image of the body on a pedestal, but then distancing themselves from, bodily fluids and processes and all these things that I think, would maybe people would expect like apology about. Yeah.
That's so cool, because it's like it's sort of like scaffolding step to kind of being rid of shame, like the bigger shames, like the more profound shames.
Exactly.
Which it seems like the book is like, a lot of it is kind of like, I mean, it's sort of like about this process of undoing shames, like discovering and then undoing shames in one's lineage. Like I love the way that that like queer narratives like are excavated like throughout the course of the book, not just in this relationship between daughter and Ben, but also in the lineage. Can you talk a little bit about that, like excavating queer stories in one's past?
Honestly, my favorite part of writing this entire book was like the pirate story.
I love the pirate story.
The 2 gay pirates. That was the most fun. And I'm just, whenever like a friend or an acquaintance is reading it, I was like, okay, you can skip everything, but did you get to the pirates? Like that was I was like, I don't care about anything. I just want you to read this like pirate fan fiction that I wrote, like, and let me know what you think. That was definitely one of my goals. Is I think there's a narrative of like seeking queerness or queer narratives outside of the family. And obviously I consume those stories. I love those stories so much, but I was really interested in, oh, what does it mean to queer lineage? And to see it as coming from like within what you already have, rather than like, oh, needing to seek, to kind of seek outside of that place. And a lot of it was like kind of wish fulfillment for me too. Like, I think, like, I always talk about this Maxine Hong Kingston interview in the New Yorker, like constantly, where there's a sentence where Maxine says that, Maxine Hong Kingston, who will respect, says that she wrote the character of the grandfather in her book to give herself a grandfather who would love her as a daughter. And that like made me, like, I burst into tears like while reading it. I was like on my phone, people were like, what's going on? And because I'd never realized that you yourself could be like a target audience for your own work, you know, like that you yourself could kind of write for yourself in that way. I thought, was that literary? Like, is that selfish? But I was like, Maxine Hong Kingston wrote like family fan fiction. And so that was, and so that was, I think that was like my motivation, is like, it was also fantasy for me. It was like pure fantasy. I mean, it draws from like historical fact, but fantasy in that it was like, oh, imagine all of these queer lineages that I don't know about that could have existed and probably did exist. And I deserved to hear those. Like, I deserve to have those. And other people do too. So I'm going to write them. Yeah.
Totally. First of all, I love that. I mean, I feel really emotional at the idea of writing the grandfather that will love you. And also, I mean, this makes me think about my dear friend, the illustrious American poet Fatima Askar, who often says that her goal in writing, or one of her goals in writing her book of poems, If They Come For Us, was to write sort of the book that she would have needed or would have wanted at like 16 or 19 or something. And so I think like, I totally relate to writing for a past self or a future self. Like, I think that, I don't know, I kind of think that like, that if our writing isn't like part of a process of learning to love ourselves, like what is it? Like, why do it? Like, it seems like a total waste of time.
Yes.
So, I don't know. And then I wanted to say something else, but now I can't. Now I've forgotten because I am emotional still about Maxine Hong Kingston. But I was gonna say, I feel like this idea of wanting to find queer history in one's own family, and not just sort of like as an alternative space to one's own family. Like, I feel like that that to me strikes me as like a very particularly, though not exclusively, queer Asian sort of like spirit of moving about it, to be like, is it possible to integrate these two parts of myself and not just like leave my family in order to, I mean, like, is it possible? And like, sometimes it's not, but to actually take that question seriously seems really important.
Actually, that reminds me of something that the writer Jenny Zhang said, and she wrote Sour Heart, where she was saying, like, when we think of a typical Bildungsroman or coming of age story, it's always kind of about fleeing home and like becoming a self, like fleeing home to find yourself. And I also love those narratives as well too. Like, but she was talking about a kind of different coming of age novel structure, coming of age structure that isn't necessarily about fleeing, but like, and I was thinking a lot about like rooting oneself even more deeply, and like, this process of excavation, which is probably where the holes came in as a very like physical thing. But that really resonated with me, because I was like, oh, I am interested in kind of subverting that typical coming of age narrative.
Totally. Subverting all kinds of narratives here, like subverting narrative, for example.
Subverting narrative, what is narrative? Subverting it all.
Well, you mentioned excavation and holes. So can we talk a little bit about the title for this event, which is a line from the book, Burial is Beginning? So beautiful. What does that mean? Burial is beginning, or what do you mean by it? And relatedly, like, what does burial begin?
Oh, wow. I love that. Thank you for mentioning the title, because I really just like pulled that out of nowhere. I was like, oh God, I was
great.
like tired. I like flipped open the book and I was like, words, I need words. So I'm really glad that resonated. Yeah, I mean, on the literal level, you know, my mom gardens a lot, and I was watching, I just enjoy also watching people plant things in a very relaxing way. And I was like, oh, it's kind of interesting that to kind of plant something, you're literally like digging a grave for the seed. Like it's kind of this weird parallel with like burying a body. Is like you're burying the seed so that it can grow something. And I was like, oh, that's so strange. And I kind of logged it in my mind, and it became a line in a poem, and then it kind of got cannibalized by the book. But yeah, no, I was thinking a lot about, well, first of all, like this like kind of circular time, like not really a linear thing, like this idea that like, you know, life to death is a very linear process. And I think the book talks a lot about like very circular time and repetitive time, and I feel like the burial to dirt to up again thing felt very circular and cyclical to me. And yeah, and thinking about like what burial begins, like I was really struck too by like reading stories of homes in the northeast of Taiwan that are dug by burying, like through digging into the ground. And I was like, oh, what an interesting contrast to this, to like, I think our idea of architecture as something like the higher you go, like this very hierarchical language of like height and transcendence. And I was like, oh, what about dirt and like soil and poop and all of these things, and how there's a kind of memory of living in that, and of that being home, and that being sacred too. And I wanted to return to that. And I think, yeah, and I just love the image of like Ben and daughter like being these like partner in crime, just like digging these holes where they shouldn't, and like perforating the earth in some way, and for those holes to be like mouths, and take on these very embodied and very visceral qualities.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and also like I feel like the structure of the book even is like, as I'm hearing you talk about it, I'm thinking about how like, yeah, rather than like moving up that like plot diagram slope, it like kind of lowers itself further and further down into the stories, which is like also, I think, yeah, it's super, super fascinating. And like, kind of like, yeah, it's beautiful to think about like the way that something progresses or like opens is that you burrow further into it, further into like your point of origin and stuff. Like it starts with the holes and then they're just like more and more holes like and deeper holes. Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
Self-perpetuating holes. They like basically almost hijack the story at some point. Yeah. I was like, yes, just let them narrate the rest of this.
Yeah. Amazing. Oh man. Okay, cool. How are we doing on time? It's like 7:30. Okay, cool. So we're switching. We're gonna move to Q&A in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But yeah, let me look at my list of questions. Oh my goodness. I guess I sort of want to talk to you more about, I want to talk to you more about holes and also more about tigers.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. I'm so ready for that.
Can you maybe say a little bit more about like, the transformation of the daughter character and like the tale, like, what's going on with the tale? Like what's going on with tigers in this book?
Yeah, well, the tale thing is really funny to me too, because when I first wrote it, it was actually just like a blip. It was like a chapter and then it was gone, and I was like, ooh. And actually Victor Matsui, who's in the chat, who was my first editor for this book, suggested like, oh, it seems like this tale has some significance or importance or resonance in the story, and like to think about that being like the structure for everything else to kind of center around. And then the tale kind of had its own resonance with like the river and the idea of an umbilical cord and a tether and a leash, and it took on all these meanings. And I was like, oh, I feel like I'm like just inventing different purposes for like a string, basically. Like it was that kind of playful. And yeah, it's also been really interesting to see people's different interpretations of it. People are like, oh, is it a metaphor for puberty? Is it a metaphor for like queerness? Like all these things. And like deep down, I'm like, it is a little bit inexplicable. And if I wanted it to feel purposefully that way, because, you know, she wakes up with it and she thinks, oh no, am I going to become a predator? Like, am I just going to wake up and fully be a tiger and like tear the heads off everyone I love? And I feel like that is it felt like a very true fear for her as someone who has inherited a lot of intergenerational violence, of knowing that she is capable of committing violence and perpetuating violence. And she fears deeply that she will become like this predatory creature. And that felt so true to me, like given everything that she carries and experiences. Yeah, and it was also really, because I'm born year of the tiger. And one of the things that people would always tell me growing up is that, like, oh, daughters born year of the tiger are like notoriously hard to marry off. They're notoriously like wild, and like no one really wants, you know, it's like kind of the opposite of like the son born in the year of the dragon. They're like the two foils to each other, I feel like. And so part of me was a little bit defiant, and I was like, oh, this is supposed to be like very inauspicious, and like, what does it mean to kind of harness that strangeness and harness that kind of marginalization, and yeah, for that to be a source of power too, and like this have all these different nuances to it. Yeah,
totally. I love what you said about like the metaphor of the tale not being totally pinned down. Like I you know, I think that I super relate to that as like, maybe as particularly as a poet, or I don't know, maybe otherwise.
Yeah.
To just be like, there's mystery in here, like, it's okay.
Like, me? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do you, how much do you like need to know what you write means as a writer?
Yeah, well, it's actually kind of a perfect transition, because I was really like agonized about the tale for a long time during the process, where I was like, what does it mean? Like, what is the tale's trajectory? And it was really helpful to think about those questions, but I realized that I wanted to end in a place of ambiguity and uncertainty, where there was actually an alternate ending to the book where, there was an alternate ending to the book that was very kind of clear cut about the tale. Like, you know exactly what it means and what she's doing with it. And then this new ending that is very ambiguous about what the tale will mean for her future came out of like the conversation with Ben. I feel like Ben like intervened in the narrative and was like, I'm going to speak for a second. And through that interaction, I realized that she's always going to live with this ambiguity of knowing that she's capable of violence, and she knows it very intimately. And also that she has these different possibilities and different paths in her life, and that she's also capable of love. And she doesn't want to sever herself in a kind of very clean way that the alternate original ending was, which is very much about severance, about just completely cleaning herself of like this lineage of like, no, I will say no to this violence, and just completely diverge. But I think she realizes like this is a part of her inheritance. Like, there's so much that she inherits that she treasures deeply, and also so much that she has to just learn to live with. And so it wasn't very neat and clean in the end, but I realized that felt right to me, like that for that question to just exist forever for her without an answer. Yeah,
totally. I have so many. Okay, there's so many directions that we could go from there. Yeah, I don't know. You want to keep talking about like inheritance and like,
yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, like how does because there's so many things that get inherited from, so there's like a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter, like 3 generations of women in this story, and there's so much that gets passed like down and also like back up. It's like this like back and forth kind of. Yeah, like maybe I'll ask like what has this book inherited? Like, who are like the book's ancestors?
Oh, I love this question. Oh my goodness. I love it. I've already said Maxine Hung Kingston, so Chinaman the Woman Warrior. I love Helen Oyeyemi's book, What Is Not Yours Is Not Yours. And the title of that book is actually a phrase that my mom uses a lot and that my grandma used. So it's like kind of an inherited phrase, which is like, what is not yours is not yours, which I love too. Justin Torres's We the Animals.
For sure.
Trash by Dorothy Allison is like a recent ancestor, just for like how unapologetically queer and lesbian it is. Like, I adore that. Yeah, and yeah, like thinking about inheritance is really interesting too, because I think like before writing this book, I had a very capitalist idea of what inheritance is. It's like to pass generational wealth or to pass down money. Like it was like, oh, you either have one or you don't. And I think this book kind of reoriented my idea of inheritance in these different ways. And yeah, and thinking about how like stories are a form of inheritance. Yeah, also trauma, like even if you don't know it, like carrying it bodily as well. So yeah, it's been really transformative, I think, for me. Yeah.
Wow, that's super interesting what you said about like the passing down of generational wealth, because it's like that, like the passing down of generational wealth is like a thing that like in conjunction with the rest of capitalism wreaks havoc. And so
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so it's so interesting to think about like what else can you pass down, you know, and like what can you pass down, or what can you like you discover in your lineage if you don't have that.
Yeah.
I've been thinking recently about
oh no, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I've just been thinking recently about like, you know, about like all of this kind of like silence in my own family history, and like how there's so little really that I know about my family history past like starting with my grandparents' generation. Like I feel like the Korean War happened and there was just like a huge gap of knowledge, at least in my experience. And so I've been thinking, or like I had a thought, like I was working through this thought like sometime last year that like if all I have is like intergenerational trauma, if that is like my only link to the generations past my grandmother, like maybe that's something also, like maybe there's something that can be opening and beautiful in that too, you know, like if that's all the information that I have.
Yeah. Wow, yeah, that really resonates with me. It reminds me of a line from a book by Edouard Louis, and he says like violence saved me from violence, and he talks about how because his father had experienced so much violence, he decided like it will not go past me. Like I will never, you know, abuse my children this way. And kind of like this active agency, I feel like amidst like so much choicelessness. And that like really broke me. I was really crying and thinking about that the violence saved me from violence. And yeah, and also what it means to be like, I refuse to inherit this, or I refuse to pass it down in this way. Like it's always going to be mine. It's always going to be in me as a potential, as a tale. I don't know, but I refuse to kind of perpetuate it in this way. And so there's like, I feel like all these different like conflicts in the book. And I feel like the mother story kind of most embodies that idea of like, no, I refuse. Like, this is my active agency. This is my intervention in this lineage. Like I'm not going to be part of this. I'm going to leave. Yeah.
Amazing. We're gonna move into Q&A, but before that, I just want to ask, what's something that you want to make sure is passed down through you, like whether that's like to biological children or like through queer family, or you know, whatever.
Yeah. I love this. I also love the idea of like lineages existing everywhere, like lineages between friends, like horizontal lineages. I don't know, like the tail being this kind of like living lineage that isn't like multi-directional and kind of wild. Yeah, so I love this question so much. Like I think for me, imagination, I think, is one really huge thing. And I think also your poetry resonates so much with me too, because I feel like the imaginative spirit behind it is so important. And it really taught me about how imagination is also a tool for survival and for creation. And it's so incredible and important. And yeah, so that's like my main thing is like, yeah, imagination as something that can be like constructive, destructive in good ways. and like possibilities, a fantasy being so important. I was like, this book is just secretly a fantasy novel, guys.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, no, I absolutely. I think that there's many opportunities for imagination to be like a spirit of imagination to be like put out into whatever multi-directional queer lineages you like proliferate through this book. So congrats.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I love there's an episode of Versus, the podcast that I host.
I love Versus.
Thanks for listening. But in the episode with Safia El Hello, she talks about ancestry, and she talks about like the concept of I think that the word that she uses is like horizontal ancestor, like your horizontal ancestor.
Yes.
Which I love. So now it belongs to all of you to use it.
Yeah, horizontal ancestors. I love it.
Cool. So we've got a question from Shreya to K-Ming Chang. Your poetry is very fluid, flows like lava. Like there's some intense emotion propelling you to write them. What's that intense emotion? Or is there some other inspiration? In all caps, I love your work.
Oh, that is so kind. Thank you so much. Wow. I just want to like pin that in my life forever to the end. Thank you. I also love that like lava image too. I was like, I feel like ideally we want our poems to be lava, just like creating these little formations, like running down this volcano. Yeah, I think what drives it for me, I actually think the lava metaphor is really perfect because I think like wanting like this desire to create in the spirit and in like the wake of absence, I think is something that is really propels me, or like in the wake of destruction, really wanting to create something. Yeah, and I was like looking up like these different people like have different definitions of writing, and I love the one that's like it's about making something possible that wasn't possible before. And yeah, that just like that completely I think guides my poetry and also my prose too. It's just like, what do you do with grief and loss and absence? Like what is possible? If not healing, then what's possible? Yeah.
Totally. I love that. Okay, another question from Fiajang Swanson. From a young writer, how do you get people to take your writing / career seriously? And perhaps more importantly, how do you take yourself seriously? Oh my God, hard relate. Oftentimes I feel my writing can be juvenile and not mature enough, but your playful and surreal yet grotesque writing style is so inspiring to me, especially knowing how young you are and all you've achieved so early on. You seriously make me feel like I can do anything. Much love. These questions are so cute. They're so beautiful.
These are the best. I'm just like, I am like dying inside because I'm like, oh my God, that is so beautiful. And also I really relate to the idea of like judging oneself for being young. And like, I feel like I got that more from myself than anyone. I probably like really psychologize myself way more than anyone did. Because I feel like I can't necessarily control what other people will think. If they look at me and think, oh my God, this person is like really young and immature and like doesn't have life experience to write. Like I can't really change that person's mind as much as I would want to. But like for myself, I think it is like a process of like, just shifting my own perspective. And I think for a long time, like there is this kind of perception like, oh, you don't have enough like experience to write about things. You don't have permission, and you don't like that you need permission in some way. And I think that's why I gravitated so much to like the space of fantasy and magical realism and speculative elements, because I'm like, who's gonna tell me that I've never grown a tail, so I can't write about people growing tails, you know? So I found so I found that space for myself, and I felt so liberated and free in that space. And that space also like brought me to all of the realism and all of the like very intense questions of my life. So I think it's just, sometimes you also just have to like block out all of that negative energy and find like your peers. I feel like I'm very lucky to, you know, have peers and friends who would never kind of look down on me in that way, and we don't look down on each other for these things. And that kind of community to me is like it feels really safe and empowering.
Yeah, for sure. I remember I think it was my first year at AWP, which was not that long ago. It was like 6 years ago or something. And a very, very esteemed writer who I will not name had just like published a poem of mine in the journal that they ran. And I went up and I was like, oh my God, hi, like, it's me, you published me, like, it's me. And she was like, and then I talked about like, oh, and I taught like your poem in my class. And she was like, how old are you? And I was like, I'm 24. Because I guess I was 20. Yeah, whatever. I was 24. And she was like, oh my God, you're like 12. And I was like, I just told you that I'm 24. Actually, like, that's literally not true. But I think, yeah. And so I've been trying to like go back to that memory with some tenderness for that writer and for myself, and be like, that it's possible to both be young and to know stuff. Like, those can both be true. Like, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. And, I always write child narrators. And to me, it's never even a question in my mind of like, oh, is this person fully a person? Like, it's not even a question. I feel like when also, if someone kind of projects onto your work that it's juvenile or any of these things, like, it's on them. It's like their thing that they're projecting onto you, and not actually reflective of yourself and your process and your work. So yeah, I would just like shed that and try to like also not to block it from your mind.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's important to both do that and hold space to be like, even though I have like wisdom and knowledge and like things to say and, beautiful things to make, there's also like, I think it's also like good to remember to give oneself like the space of growth, to be like, no matter how young or old I am, there is like a lot of potential for growth ahead of me,
for uncertainty and doubt, because that's where writing comes out of anyway. I feel like
exactly.
Okay,
cool. Another question from KS. Thank you so much to the both of you for sharing your work and thoughts and conversation with us. K-Ming, I was really interested in what you described as your movement from poetry to prose. I found myself wondering if you feel there's a point at which a certain amount or depth of narrative becomes too much for a poem to hold.
Oh, this is such a great question. I would love to know. I would love if someone could tell me and be like, this poem should be a story. Well, I had naturally, I realized that I naturally write 10-page poems that have stories and multiple generations. And I just that's how I naturally even enter the space of poetry. So they kind of feel, even though it's a shift, it kind of feels in the same spirit of wanting to be really expansive and exhaustive and just really, I guess, word vomiting, really just kind of letting it out. But yeah, no, oh, sorry, what was the last part of that question?
Is there a certain point at which the narrative becomes too much for a poem to hold?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think sometimes it's when I realize that there's a very specific voice coming out in the poem that would be really interesting as a narrator of a longer work, and that's when it shifts. But I feel like poetry can hold so much, and I feel like even the kind of prose that I'm drawn to has that spirit of poetry of fragmentation or kind of gesturing at the shape of something rather than being very so I think poetry can definitely hold a lot as well, but it's usually this is a character, a voice, though persona poems also exist, so you can totally have poems that are characters.
Yeah, for sure. I think that sometimes also poems might be outgrowing the poem form, but the thing that they might be growing toward might be a form that hasn't even been invented yet, you may have to invent the form as part of the process of writing the poem, or the piece, whatever it is.
Completely. That's completely true. Yeah, absolutely. I felt that definitely when I was writing the letters in the book. I was what form is this? I'm who knows? Let's go with it.
Oh yeah, but I love the way that the caesuras break up the rhythm of the rest of the prose there. Yeah. And the way that, oh wait, well, we could talk about, this is another holes conversation that we could continue to go into. Holes in the text. Okay. Another question from May Macaulay. It's a clarification question. K-Ming, what is the article you mentioned on Maxine Hong Kingston writing The Grandfather That Would Love Her?
Oh, yeah, it's by Hua Xu. It's in the New Yorker. I'm not sure what the title is, but you can definitely find the profile on the New Yorker. And it's HUA space HSU is the name of the writer.
Yeah. Awesome, thanks. From Nuha, this conversation has been so interesting and useful to K-Ming Chang, leaning into the conversation about subverting narrative forms. Can you talk more about your writing process?
Oh, I'm like, do you have, how long do you have to talk about process? Well, I think for the book was very unique, and then I wrote it in like 2 months. Like, it was an extremely fast process. Like, I've never written that fast in my life, but it was, I think it was because I wasn't thinking like this is going to be a book. Like, it was so just like, oh, fragment here, little fable there. I wrote all of the letters in one document. I was like, oh, I don't know where these are going. And so it was like so playful that I wasn't thinking necessarily like, oh, what will the final form be? But I think, so process for that was very, very different. It's almost like collaging, and then like tearing things off and then collaging again. I think like ordinarily, I have a naturally I'm like an ENFJ. I don't know if that means anything, but I'm very
it means so much to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a planner, and I literally plan like every single thing. So I go to the page thinking that it's going to be like that. And then I just like procrastinate and don't want to do that. And then what I end up doing is like ends up being the thing. So I think my process is just tricking myself. It's just tricking myself into just getting there in the first place and like being with myself. And then at some point, just like letting go that need for control sometimes. And then something comes out of it. And I try to be consistent with it as well. But like, everyone has a different thing too. Some people are like, yeah, I'll just write like 20,000 words on the toilet, and other people are like, I'm just gonna, dabble every month or so. And I think it's all valid. Yeah.
Okay, another question from Elijah Edwards. They say, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation. I love the beautiful and the gross coexisting in your work, K-Ming. Does this connection help you narrate and liberate queer bodies and experiences? What does the connection help queerness reclaim / inherit? So it's kind of a long question.
Wow.
Let's say, yeah, like
that's
brainy
beautiful.
Question. Yeah. So does the connection between the beautiful and the gross help you narrate and liberate queerness, queer bodies, queer experiences? Mm-hmm. What does it help queerness reclaim or inherit?
Wow, that is so beautiful. Honestly, I'm like ready for someone to write a dissertation about this in the audience if anyone wants to go for it. That's so beautiful. Yeah, I think I do think a lot about like the relationship to shame, because I think that that's something that is very prominent in Maxine Hong Kingston's work too, especially in that first story, No Name Woman, this idea of like, what does it mean to have inherited shame and silence, and what does it mean to kind of subvert that? I definitely think like what I really didn't want to do is like to have these two girls who are like falling in love and then have like fade to black, because like I'm so used to like that fade to black where it's like, and then and then we like kind of transcend their bodies, and it's just like just language. And I always wanted the language to be very directly kind of ensnared in the body, and to constantly kind of remind the reader of how embodied this experience is and how like physically there they are, and to not kind of do that like and fade out situation, because I think it's like more than a desire to be seen or anything like that. It's like this, I don't know, it feels like an articulation of desire to like focus so much on like the grossness and the beauty, and to just like, hold both. And to be like super alive in that moment.
Yeah. Right. Like a presencing. I mean, that's interesting to say, like that you say it's not so much about wanting to be seen. Like it's not so much about just like a queer visibility campaign, but about like, allowing yourself to be present, like to, to like experience, like fully experience the moment. I mean, I feel like that's also so like necessary for queer readers, right? To be like, oh, I get to actually see my bodily experience being represented and like made beautiful and like made lyrical, but like here, like livable,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, another question From Larissa Lai. Oh my God, this is.
Oh my God, Larissa Lai. Sorry, I love your book so much. Thank you so much for all your writing. I meant to name you in the ancestors part too. Oh my goodness. Okay, revision.
Oh, that's right. Oh my God.
Larissa Lai. Yes, Selfish Girl. Yes.
Larissa asks, can you talk about ways of knowing that you employ when you don't have the story?
Wow, that is so
amazing.
That is so profound, and I feel like is all about the process. Because again, like the presence of fantasy, I think, ways of knowing. That's so incredible. I feel like language and letting the language lead me. I had no kind of idea, like even with the pirate story or the family histories, I didn't quite know like, oh, what is the plot going to be? What are the characters? What are they going to encounter? What are they going to overcome? But the language and the voice, I felt like it was guiding me towards something, or that it was, I was surprising myself. I was like, oh, this is interesting, this detail. Like, I'm not sure where it comes from, but I trusted the language. And I was like, oh, I'm going to trust that, that this sentence is going somewhere. Or I just really love the pleasure of the words too. And I feel like pleasure is a way of knowing too. And I think we often we really romanticize writing being a really agonizing process. And it really is. But I think for me in this particular, like with Bestiary, it was pleasure. Just like the pleasure of the language and the desire to follow it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the pleasure and agony, like perhaps it's like a very queer thing to say that.
Yeah, are also
probably the same thing.
Yeah, I know. Actually, two sides of the same coin as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, Chini asks, thank you so much for this conversation. 3 exclamation marks. It is a little surreal to see two of my favorite writers interacting heart for both K-Ming and Franny. You talk a lot about metaphorical embodiment, inheritance, storytelling, and the physical bodies of your characters, the tail, body fluids. Why are both of you drawn toward bodies in your work? I think that we sort of talked about this. We talked about this some, but anything else that we can kind of like add to this conversation?
Oh, so interesting.
Bodies.
Well, I'm also really interested. I mean, I don't know if this is interesting, but like when I was doing, I did a little bit of research into some of the stories that were in Bestiary, and all of the myths I knew were about women turning into animals, like fox spirits, and which I think is very common in East Asian myth, fox spirits and snake women, the white snake, the woman turns into a snake. And it was almost like a form of like coding to the audience of like, this person is transgressive and scary and monstrous, and we should and that's why it's because they're possessed by this other thing. Like she could be a great woman, a great mother, a great daughter, but she's actually a fox, or she's secretly a snake, and that's why. And so I think I'm really interested in that kind of like, that space of like, oh, what bodies do we consider monstrous or strange or marginalized, and like how do these characters like harness that strangeness for themselves, or like play with the porousness between all these boundaries and categories that have been created for them and their bodies.
No, I love the definition of monstrousness as like a person, like the ability to transgress one's bodily form, like again, like very queer trans way of understanding like these stories that we've grown up with. For sure. I think that it's also like, I think that for like women of color and like queer people of color, like it's hard to not talk about bodies in our work, right? Like how do you do it, and like why would you want to do it? Like why try to escape? I mean, there's a lot of different answers to the question, why try to escape the body? But I think that question's not like a simple one. It's like a complex, multi-layered one.
Yeah, and I talk about this a lot too, but like I feel like in the canon of Western literature, like the intellect and the mind rules all, and it's like body mind separation, and like our literary aspiration should be like this very intellectual, like abstract state. And the books that I'm most interested in and drawn to are like the opposite of that. It's like about the integration of those things, but also like trusting the body as well and bodily knowledge.
Yeah, well, especially because like I think that that Western dichotomy that you named just now kind of implies that the abstract and cerebral are like, that's where mystery lives, and like the body is like what's known, and actually like the body's incredibly mysterious and like right, like incredibly freaky deaky. So
that's so true. That's completely true. You're right. Mysteries of the body, growing a tail. All of that, exactly.
Okay, 2 more and then that's going to be it. 2 more questions.
Great.
And then we're gonna say goodnight. Okay, from Cindy Kwong to K-Ming Chang. I love it. It's like a little postcard. The way your writing reflects your introspection and lineage is so amazingly inspiring. I'm curious, what are some ways or questions you use to navigate these histories or to guide yourself toward thinking about these grounded understandings of yourself, especially when the emotions alone can be overwhelming? Okay, wow, that's a really stacked question.
Yeah. No, that's really beautiful. I think that's really true, because actually when I was writing and trying to think like very directly about certain stories that I had overheard, I was like, how can I even touch this? I'm like, it feels so like it doesn't feel like, it feels like such a violation to even touch these stories and histories. And again, I think what led me through that is I started thinking like, oh, who's the one speaking it? Like, who's the one shaping and telling it and giving it to someone? Like, what is the relationship between the teller and the listener? So it became a bit meta. It became like stories about the storytelling, because I couldn't get at the story directly. I couldn't just be like, oh, this is the story of the pirates. It was, my grandmother told me the story of the pirates, and here's all the ways that she's wrong. And so like being able to put them in context, of this like intimate relationship between people just made so much, and like addressing the story itself, like it's a little bit meta, but like I feel this way so much too about like other texts too. I'm like, oh, I want to talk about like what this story is existing in right now, like the environment that it exists in, the context that it's in. And I feel like sometimes addressing that directly, of being like, oh, the narrator doesn't know how to touch this, or it's being filtered through all these things, or here's everything that is a total question mark. Like all of those things, like I feel like they're okay to acknowledge as well, and are part of the process.
Great. Okay, last question of the night.
Thank you.
From Farah Ghafoor. Hi, K-Ming. I've been following your work since your Tumblr blog, and I'm so excited to read your book. I'm wondering how you found your writing community.
Wow. First of all, I want to say, that is dedication, and I'm so grateful. And oh my goodness, my Tumblr days are very embarrassing. But but that makes me really happy too. I feel like we're on a journey together. Finding community. I think I've also said this, but like I always thought it would like just land on me, and I was like, oh, I'm in New York, like I'll just like somehow it will find me. And what ended up happening is like I was actually seeking like authority figures to approve of me, and I realized, oh, is my definition of community just like a teacher saying that I'm really good? Like, what am I seeking? Like some kind of authoritative person to tell me that I'm good enough? And I realized that was my definition of community. I was like, oh, if this person, like it was all about external validation. And I think when like in the pursuit of that, it made writing really painful, and it made creation really painful, and it was just like not sustainable. And so I think actually very recently, like with my writing group who might be here tuned in right now, like I realized that there's so much value in having community that isn't necessarily about approval or permission or any of those things, but it's just about like, let's be uncertain and like experiment and just like fail together in all of these ways, and not feel like we're going towards like a grade or toward approval or toward being good enough. And that has been really transformative for me. So I definitely, what we were saying too about horizontal ancestors and horizontal lineages, it's like I had my community all along, but I was just like constantly looking to other places.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Peer mentor is the other like version of that phrase that I've heard people use.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tumblr,
I think
people
it's,
on Tumblr. Yeah, like that was it. Like the people
oh,
on
for
Tumblr.
sure.
That
Oh
was
my
my community.
God.
I was like, let's reblog each other. I've never seen your face, just your avatar. Like that was community, and it was wonderful.
Oh
Yeah.
my God. Yeah. No, my first writing community, now that I think about it, my first writing community was like the forum online where I like of like K-pop fan fiction that I was writing.
Yeah.
Those were
Oh
my
my
first,
goodness.
that was my first like people who were like commenting on my things and giving me feedback and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Shout out to Tumblr, shout out to the K-pop forum.
Exactly.
K-pop fan fiction forum. Okay, I think that will unless you have anything else to add in at the very end, K-Ming, I think that will kind of wrap up.
No, just
Okay.
thank you so much for everyone's questions. And I'm so sorry if I didn't get a chance to answer yours, but if you want to like email me, it's on my my email's on my website. If you want to just email me your question or DM me on Twitter or something, like I'm happy to answer too, because I know there are a few that I missed. And I'm very excited to connect with you all. So just wanted to say that.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here, and congratulations once again to you on this incredible achievement, on this beautiful book that you've that is a gift to all of us.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That means so much to me. Thank you so much, Franny, for being here with me.
Everyone, thank you both so much. I hope you can hear me. I want to just ask, it's happening already, but I want to ask for a round of virtual applause in the chat for K-Ming and for Franny. This was such an incredibly special night. Thank you both. And thank you to everyone who joined us online. My name is Lilly Philpott. I'm the programs manager at the Asian American Writers Workshop, and I just have a couple of very quick closing notes. We have a slate of amazing events coming up this fall. This Friday, October 2nd, we are presenting a Brooklyn Book Festival bookend event with Kaya Press and Kundiman, featuring Ed Lin and Marie Mangok Lee. You can learn more about what's on the calendar, and you can RSVP at aaw.org/events. I want to thank our friends at Books Are Magic, who are our virtual booksellers this season. You can find a link to purchase K-Ming and Franny's books in the chat, though I know there are a lot of congratulations happening right now, so you may need to scroll up a little bit. We highly recommend that you purchase their books and that you support an independent bookstore while doing so. And finally, I want to just congratulate you again, K-Ming, on such an incredible and beautiful book, which I have right here beside me. We are so glad to be able to celebrate with you, and we wish you all the best as your book makes its way into the world. Congratulations. Thank you, everyone, again. Have an amazing night. Thank you so much.